Good evening. The League of Women Voters of Pocatello welcomes you to our 2025 Idaho Legislative Preview. I'm Linda Engel, moderator of tonight's forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization which seeks to promote active citizen participation in government. Tonight's forum is being recorded and aired live on KISU. Recordings of this event may not be used without the express written approval of the League. No part of this production may be used in advertising or in any way to promote a candidate. The League only permits audio and video broadcasts of this event in its entirety. The format for tonight will be as follows. I will call on each legislator in rotating order, and they will have 1.5 minutes to give their personal perspective, and then we will begin with the questions. Our participants received these questions in December. They will have 2 minutes to respond and will be muted after 2 minutes. We will fit in as many questions as possible in this hour. We'll not be taking any questions or comments from the audience this evening. So if we could have slide number 2. There we go. Tonight, we're hearing from Senator Jim Guthrie, Senator James Ruchti, Representative Dan Garner, and Representative Dustin Manwaring, Representative Tanya Burgoyne from District 29, and Rick Cheatham from District 28 declined our invitation to participate this evening. So, legislators, let's start with your personal perspective. What do you see as your biggest challenge, opportunity, and what are your goals for this coming session? You will each have 1.5 minutes to answer. And please watch the chat for when your time is over. So let's start with Senator Ruchti.
Thank you.
Go ahead and unmute yourself, please, and go.
Okay, you're able to hear me? You're able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to thank the League for putting this on. I consider this to be an important event that we do every session. The beginning of the session, it kind of focuses all of us on some of the issues that are coming up and gives us a chance to get a head start on some of the challenges we'll have. This is going to be a challenging session. On the Senate side, in the primaries, there have been some more far-right candidates elected to the Senate, and it just creates a dynamic in the Senate where the more traditional Republicans and the far-right Republicans in the Senate are pretty evenly split, and then you have the Democrats. With that comes an emboldened far-right, and so I think we're going to start seeing some policy proposals that kind of fall in that category of social warfare issues. We've seen a lot of those over the past few years, library bills, restrictions on women's health care, restrictions on the ballot box, things like that. So I think we're going to see more of those. We just have to make sure we're prepared to address those issues, and I feel like I am.
Okay, thank you. Representative Manwaring.
Well, good evening, and I appreciate the opportunity also to participate, and thank you to the League for inviting us and giving us the forum to share some of our thoughts and opinions. I do appreciate being able to share that back with the constituents back home. And going into this session, this is going to be the start of my 4th session, so start of my 7th year here in the Idaho Legislature. I've learned a lot over those years, and one thing that I've watched our state continue to do over that period is continue to grow. We've had population increase that has continued to come into our state. We've gone through the COVID years. We're now trying to see where that settles back out in our budgeting, but we're continuing to be on a trajectory of ongoing economic growth in our state, and that comes with challenges. And so one of my perspectives and one of the things that drives me to continue to be over here and serve is how do we make long-term decisions for Idaho? How do we invest for the future when we're on a pretty strong growth growth streak. You haven't seen a recession in quite a few years now. How do we conservatively budget, but also invest in infrastructure and water and roads and schools and things for the next several decades? So that drives me, and that's the perspective I try to carry over here. Just more specifically, going into this legislative session, we maintained the same speaker that we've had the last 2 years. Mike Moyle's our speaker. There are a few chairmanship changes, and you could say the House maybe got even a little bit more conservative. But I think more of the same from the House. I think that's what you're going to see, at least from our side. We'll see what happens in the Senate, and the senators can speak to that. But we do have some of these big issues that we're still working on. I think we'll get more time tonight. And thank you.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
Well, good evening, and I'll echo the thoughts of the others in thanking the league for having this. It's a good opportunity to get kind of a precursor to what's going on at the session. And it's been mentioned that the political dynamics have changed, and certainly 3 of the 4 members of leadership in the Senate are new. So that's going to present some interesting dynamics. Obviously, we're going to talk later about school choice, and which is kind of a misnomer. It's actually paying for school choice, but the governor has kind of tipped his hand already. So that's going to be certainly an item of hot debate. Some opportunities that I had thought going into the session would be some relief on the abortion issues to provide some protection for some the mom's health, the victims, and the docs, having seen 60 OBGYNs leave the state. But I'm hearing that that's going to get the brakes put on it as well. And in fact, there's a bill that takes it the other way that I've got in my committee right now that pretty much removes all exemptions. So that kind of gives you an idea of the different dynamics that are in play and thought processes. Some of my goals is some possible water legislation to try to help in that regard. Some election consistency. Certainly we'll be watching immigration, unreasonable gun bills, unreasonable abortion bills, and other social issues. There'll be certainly something we'll be watching as far as things that are challenging. And quite frankly, we'll have to probably play some defense this year on some issues. So thanks again for the opportunity.
You are welcome, and thank you. Representative Garner.
I also would like to thank the League of Women's Voters. I think it's a very public service that you do by keeping the population informed with what's happening with their government. I think that's a very important thing. And I would echo everyone's what they've said about the different leadership and the different perspective on the legislature this year. One of my great concerns is if you listen to the governor's State of the State address, he mentioned that we'd had back-to-back record tax cuts and breaks, and that we've done record investment into infrastructure and schools and stuff like that, which is great. But we have also tapped into the sales tax quite heavily the last 2 years. I'm concerned that if the economics situation in the country and the state does turn down, that we could be heading for a recession. And him promising another tax break, I agree with, and I hope we can do that, but I don't want to do it in a way that would hurt any of the other critical infrastructure for the state of Idaho. And so I will be watching that real close. I also echo Senator Guthrie's concern about the women's health issue. I don't see the makeup in the legislature this year. I don't see something working its way forward, but I do know that the hospitals and doctors have been hurting because of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I appreciate all of your perspectives. Let's go ahead and begin with the questions. The first one is about the legislature itself. The upcoming legislative session will consist of 14% Democrats and 86% Republicans. Registered voters in Idaho include 36% unaffiliated, 19% are third party and Democrats. So what this means is that up to 55% of our citizens are potentially unrepresented. So the 2-part question, How will you represent those individuals that did not vote for you in the recent election and ensure that the views of all Idahoans will be represented? And in December, many committee leadership positions changed, and how will that impact the bills that come to the floor? And this time, let's start with Representative Manwaring.
Well, thank you for the question. And I think one of the things I like to do is just take a step back and obviously recognize that we do, as candidates, choose to affiliate with parties, and we run in partisan elections. And that process helps distinguish our political values and our philosophies. But when we're elected, once we are elected, we represent all constituents. And I try to do my best to remember that and represent the districts of the constituents of District 29 and the citizens of Pocatello, and support lawmaking that is reflective of my district. And that is one thing that I try to do to protect and represent those individuals. One of the things that was asked in the question is about, we do have a large amount of unaffiliateds, and those could lean one side or the other depending on where you are in the state. And that's a different question about, participating in elections also. But, what I want to do is make sure that we have in Pocatello, and I think actually one more comment about kind of the electorate in Pocatello. I think that electorate has elected, if you look over the last decade, we've sent split party representation to Boise. And I think that's, says more about the voters of Pocatello than anything else about who they think best represents their values here in Boise. And so, but the other thing that, I think the best thing that we can do is maintain those open lines of communication with our voters back home, make sure we're listening to them, we're communicating back to them, we're focusing on those shared values, and focusing on local needs. If we're focusing on those local needs, I think we're doing our job. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Senator Guthrie.
Thank you for the question. I guess maybe I'm a little bit too much of an optimist, but I'm assuming they did vote for me. So I'm going to start use that as a starting point, or if they didn't, that they will in the next election. And I will say that percentages aren't as relevant as one might think, because quite frankly, the Republican Party is clearly divided. And so you have factions within that, which actually creates some diversity. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not like everybody's voting in groups and as a herd. So it's a little more divided that way than you might think. And I'll tell you, even back when I was a county commissioner, when somebody would come to me with a problem, I never, not once, ever asked if somebody was a Democrat or Republican. You just try to help them and answer the problem and get their questions answered if you can. As far as more people being represented, I think we missed a real opportunity. And I don't say we, including me, as far as the effort goes, but when you look at the ballot initiative that was there, if that had just been about open primaries, I think you would have had a chance to maybe move the needle on having an opportunity to include more people. But the ranked choice voting, let's face it killed that option. And so it will hurt further ballot initiatives, I believe, because that was probably not presented the most accurately that it should have been. And I think that hurt an opportunity to take a step forward and having more Idahoans represented. The last part of the question, as I mentioned before, we had 3 of the 4 members of leadership change and some committee chairs change. You've got a situation where there's not an election year coming up. People have over a year. There's no urgency to get out to go campaign. So with a lot of new members and that dynamic in place, you're going to see a lot of creative ideas, and you'll see probably more difficult bills come to the floor for a vote.
Okay, thank you. Representative Garner.
Thank you. I also feel like that once you're elected, I'm no longer a Republican running for my district. I'm elected to represent the whole district, whether they voted for me or not. And so when I take a vote on the floor, I try and think that way. I try and think, is this the best thing for District 28? Is this the best thing for my rural communities? And is this the best thing for my urban communities in that district? And quite often I'll reach out to the different mayors or city councils or the Chamber of Commerce's and ask them their opinion on which bill it's coming through, or the superintendents of the school. I would encourage that all the constituents of District 28 feel free to email me, call me, write me with your concerns, whatever you have, because it does make a difference and I do listen. As for the different makeup of the House committees this year, you're right. We've got new chairmen. We got a new chairman on House Ed, and how he decides to run that committee will make a difference of what bills we see and what bills we don't see. And it will make a difference this year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Senator Ruchte.
So many of you know that I served in the legislature from 2006 to 10 and then came back in 2020. And when I was in before with Donna Bowe, and I don't know if Diane Bilyeu's on the call, and then the late Lane Smith, we were about 24% of the body. And so we've lost some numbers, the Democrats have. And you might think, well, you must be even less effective, but I haven't found that to be the case because of some of the things that Senator Guthrie has mentioned with the infighting in the majority party. There have been opportunities for the Democratic Party to have more effect on policy that's passed. It's been our votes that have helped key budgets get passed. It's us combining our votes with the far right that have stopped some legislation that I thought was bad legislation dealing with immunity for pesticide manufacturers, and the list goes on. So I've actually felt more effective since I've returned. Representing the community, you have to, and I think Representative Manwaring agrees with this. If you're going to represent our I'll call it a mixed community, a purple community, you have got to be paying attention to everybody. And if you're just going to, those that are blue, or in Representative Manwaring's case, red, just because they make you feel warm and fuzzy, you're making a huge mistake. You've got to be out talking to the chamber, talking to the mayors, talking to people at Idaho State University, talking to the school district, talking to teachers. You have to understand kind of that lifeblood of the community and understand what they're concerned about and what they wish we would stop spending our time on. That list is pretty strong. As far as committee makeup, one thing I would point out when it comes to Medicaid expansion passed on an initiative because the legislature would not act. And so the people took that on. It passed with 60% approval. And there's been an effort to roll back Medicaid expansion ever since.
Thank you.
Those efforts have been unsuccessful. And so the speaker is now stacked the Health and Welfare Committee on the House side. He's added additional people and put people on that will vote to roll back Medicaid expansion.
Thanks, James. Senator Ruchte, appreciate that. All right, our next question is on parental rights and education. The Idaho Constitution requires a general, uniform, and thorough system of free public schools. Private schools and homeschools have no academic or fiscal accountability. What is your position on parents receiving public dollars for private education, including through tax credits, vouchers, or education savings accounts? And we'll start this time with Senator Guthrie.
Thank you. As I look at the past efforts to pass something of this nature that had no accountability and different things, and the murmurings I'm hearing around the Capitol, I continue to have concerns about using a situation where we either have tax credits or vouchers or education savings accounts. I think prior to that, we need to have a deeper dive into whether it be interim committees, whether it be involving the public education people that are already in the systems and doing there and trying to coordinate. If we're going to diversify the effort, I think it needs to come with the coordination of those that are in the effort. So I think that's maybe something that hasn't happened at this time. Now, when you look at the narrative that it does not take public education funds, I mean, you can say we have extra money, so we're going to dedicate that extra money to that end that we wouldn't normally have done. But really, it doesn't matter if the state spends money on vouchers that it has or doesn't get the money that it otherwise would have received due to a tax credit. It really is the same money. And we just have to decide where our priorities are and how we spend that. Now, I think that the train is on the tracks at this point. As you all know, the governor has committed 50 million to this end. The superintendent of public instruction is working on a bill with the governor's office and other key players in the issue. So to say that it'll be hard to stop this year is probably, an understatement. And maybe they'll come up with something where the districts will say, you know what, there's accountability, there's a budget cap that we feel comfortable with, and there's these kind of things. And maybe people will start to embrace it. We'll see. I'm not there yet, but as always, you listen and you try to learn and move forward with the best end result that you can.
Thank you. Representative Garner.
Yes, I think it's a well-known fact that I'm not in favor of a ESA or a savings account or voucher, whatever you want to call it. Well, I'm not in favor of public money being spent for private education or for private schools. And you hit on the main reason why I feel that way is in the Constitution, it comes right out and spells out that the state is responsible to provide this education system, and then it's up to the parents whether or not they want to send their kids there or somewhere else. But we have an obligation in the Constitution to provide that. I don't feel like we can sidestep that obligation by simply cutting a check for every family that wants to go somewhere else to school. I think it's also, when you look at the other states of where it's been implemented, it definitely is a huge drain on their budgets. If it doesn't, they've said that it's not going to come out of the public education fund, but it's got to come out of somewhere. It's all the same pie, and all the money comes out of that pie of money. So it is a very big concern with me, and I'm hoping that that at least what they bring forward will have, if they bring something that has accountability both at how the money is spent and where it's spent. I will not support something without accountability and limits like the public schools have on their finances. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Ruffey.
Thank you. As with the last 2 years, I can tell you that if I could only accomplish one thing this legislative session, it would be to defeat the voucher proposals that are going to be coming. And we've been able to do that the last 2 years because people came together and recognized this as really, really bad policy. If you look at the other states that have gone down this road, every one of them has lived to regret it. These programs do not work. They come in a variety of sizes, a variety of flavors, but they all do the same thing, which is they give away public dollars to private schools and religious schools without accountability. They are ripe for fraudulent spending. In fact, down in Arizona, just recently, they had $600,000 spent by these people who basically created ghost children. And it wasn't the government that caught them. It was their credit union put the government on notice that something was wrong, and they escaped, took the money with them. Somebody rented a Tesla for driver's ed, kayaks, ski passes, trampolines for PE. This is what happens when you don't have accountability. And frankly, in Arizona, they don't put any money into the accountability piece. What little accountability protections they have, they won't fund properly because they don't want to know. They don't want to know that the program's not working. This is a bad idea. It results in ballooning budgets. These programs are always started with the promise that it'll be a $50 million spend or a $75 million, but it always grows, always grows. Sideboards are put on to make sure that the money goes, for example, to needy students, but those sideboards are quickly removed in the following years so that the program expands and costs more. This is taxpayer money, and taxpayer money should go to public schools that are accountable to the taxpayers.
Okay, thank you. Representative Manwaring.
So on this question, obviously this is one we've been talking about for a couple of years and through the election cycle a lot. And when I came to Boise first, and we just talked about a question about, kind of our personal perspective, but I try to deal in the political reality. And in this building, the political reality, which I think you've seen with the governor's recognition and allocating at least $50 million towards that subject this year, is that we're trying to solve an issue where we have a significant amount of our legislators in this building that want to do some form of more education choice and to increase education choice in Idaho. So that's reflective of some Idaho values and some constituents, whether that's reflective of all of our values and constituents. And I'm here to try to figure out how to have something that some way to solve this issue to provide more choice to parents and to have those dollars follow the students while we also have accountability and we have sideboards. So we haven't seen a bill that's had accountability that I would support yet, and I've been pretty clear on that. But I would just like to mention a couple of things that we have done. We've done the Idaho Launch Grant Program, which I supported. Some of those funds went to private schools. We did Empowering Parents grants. We've had that program, and it's been a successful program for a while now, which we could expand that program. And those have accountability measures with them. If we do a tax credit, I've been quite clear that, I would even support where a parent had to upload test scores and show that their students were taking tests. We have to do something if we're going to put these dollars towards private education, but I want those dollars to go to the parents and to the students, not to the schools, and that's where those dollars should follow. So I'm looking for that solution, and I'd like to solve the problem. And I think in recognition of that, I'm not a no. I'm a let's solve this issue and see if we can do it in a way that is satisfactory to Idaho and to our public schools.
Well, thank you. All right, our next question concerns voting rights. Currently, Idahoans can use absentee ballots, vote early, and register on Election Day. The new voting laws make it difficult for many individuals, including students, nursing home residents, and disabled citizens to vote. How will you ensure that voting rights of all citizens are protected? And let's start with Representative Garner.
I support legitimate absentee ballots, and I see the need for them. I think it's more important that we get the voters out to vote than it is to worry about whether it's an absentee ballot or an early ballot. But we should be encouraging our population to vote and to take an interest in the government because it affects them. I represent a very large, most of it is rural Idaho, and those absentee ballots are very essential to the elderly out in those areas, and for those that are shut in the nursing homes and the military. I don't see how you do away with absentee ballots without including something for the military. I will keep that in mind if they bring forward something that hurts the election process. And definitely, I always reach out to my county clerks and see if they think there is voter fraud or if there's something that needs to be tweaked on the bills that come forward. And I will continue to do that.
Great, thank you. Senator Ruchte.
Yeah, we've been talking about voting rights for several years now. The conversation got started because there was a false belief, frankly, that our elections were not secure, that there was fraud taking place in our elections, and the data, the evidence just isn't there to support that. And this is what happens when you start creating policy based on a bad premise. The bills you create start having unintended consequences. And I think we've done that. I mean, Representative Garner mentioned some of those. That makes some of the things we proposed have made it harder for people in rural communities and the elderly in rural communities in particular to ensure their vote gets counted. We made it recently, I think it was last year, so that students couldn't use a student ID. And I don't want to overstate the effect of that, because I'm not sure that there were really that many college students that were using student IDs to vote. But there were some who were. And, I think that's a mistake, because you want young people to start voting early on in their life, because it's habit forming. And if you haven't started voting until you're in your, mid 30s, you're probably not going to start voting. So this is what happens though when we create policy based on a bad premise, and that's what we've done here.
Okay, thank you. Representative Manwaring.
Well, I think the most fundamental thing that we can do to ensure voting rights are protected is to make sure we're safeguarding election integrity. And I think we've done that really well in Idaho. We have safe and secure elections in Idaho. They're run really efficiently. We don't have instances, or haven't historically had instances of or fraud or failures in our election processes. And so that's credit to how we do it in Idaho. And I think, there's a couple of things that we've done just in the last couple legislative sessions. In particular, we've increased, the audit requirements for post-elections, and how we're making sure that we go back and audit the elections that we've had and make sure that there hasn't been any issues and that the counts are accurate. And I think when we do those things, when we make sure that we have election integrity, that encourages voter participation, and that encourages people to come out. They know that we have a process that, their voice, when they go mark their ballot, it will be counted accurately and it will be recorded. And I think that helps. We need to make sure we have adequate polling places and resources, and that we're announcing, and the League of Women Voters is part of that, making sure people know when the elections are happening, and making sure that we have increased participation. We did see a shift from, same day voting to more early voting in this last cycle. Both political parties seem to increase the amount of early voting, and I support absentee and early voting, and I will continue to do so. But I'd like to make sure we have consistency in that, and that's one thing that I've tried to fight for, is making sure that we have early and absentee voting, but we're doing it consistently from election to election, so that when that changes, or county to county they do it differently, I think it can discourage participation. And so I'd like to see more consistency in how we do those early and absentee voting.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
Yeah, thank you. One of the biggest examples of people being left out of the process was last year's presidential caucus, where less than 7% of voters got to vote. It completely cut out your military, a lot of probably your students, your shut-ins, your seniors that couldn't get out to a caucus. And I had a bill last year to try to end that and consolidate the presidential and down ticket elections at a compromise date in April, passed the Senate and didn't get through the House, didn't get a hearing in the House. And I may try to do something again this year along those lines. When you look at protection of voting right, it applies to reasonable accessibility as well as election integrity. And, if the net's cast too broadly and the standards are too liberal, then the stage is set for fraud. If the qualifications to vote are too strict, then people can be estranged from the process. So the key really is balance. And as far as the students being left out, that district is obviously north of me, so I don't know all the particulars. Didn't have anybody contact me on the students not being able to vote. But I didn't hear anything about that. We must remember, though, voting is a right and a privilege, and that does require some responsibility on those willing to participate in the process. One of the things that's happening this Friday in Senate State Affairs is there's a federal elections official coming in, and Secretary of State McGrain has asked for some time to put him on the agenda and maybe give us a flavor for what some of the things that's going on around the country, or some ideas that we can employ at the state level. But I'll tell you, Secretary McGrain does a phenomenal job, and I think there's great confidence in the election process here in Idaho, and he really does do a phenomenal job. So I have great confidence in Idaho, but that confidence certainly needs to continue and extend beyond the borders of the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is about women's health care in Idaho. Idaho's abortion ban is one of the most restrictive reproductive policies in the country. This has caused an exodus of 22% of our obstetricians and closures of labor and delivery units. Due to the vagueness of the law, hospitals are having difficulties recruiting doctors and nurses. Many pregnant patients have required emergency transportation to other states for health care. This law imposes tremendous economic and emotional stress on those Idaho families and their physicians. Two-part question. First one is, how will you amend this law to address the safety and health care of women with pregnancy complications and to clarify physicians' rights and responsibility? And the second part is that 65% of Idahoans believe women should have access to reproductive health care options, including abortion. And so what is your perspective? That's the second one. And let's start with Senator Ruckty.
Yeah, like with the voucher issue, we could probably spend a half hour on this question alone.
Yeah.
We've really screwed this up for the state. I'll just tell you that. And I don't think I'm alone in feeling that way. We have made it really difficult for young families who run into pregnancy complications to deal with those complications. We've made it difficult for doctors to practice medicine. You've listed some of the problems, but we have women who are being airlifted to get care out of state because they don't meet the strict definition of the statute, and doctors and hospitals are concerned that if they provide the care that they normally would, that they've been trained to provide, given the circumstances they're looking at, that it could create not only legal liability, but perhaps result in jail time for physicians. I talked to one of our local hospital CEOs who described a situation where a mother came into the hospital. They were worried their pregnancy had gone south. They were worried she was going to go into sepsis. They had to make an emergency decision, and the doctor had to call the CEO to let him know what was going on, to get the CEO's thoughts on it. CEO, this was a Saturday, had to call the attorney who was at his kid's soccer game and get the attorney to weigh in on it. And then the emergency room, the doctor had to talk to the anesthesiologist, make sure he was on board, because it's all their licenses, it's all their liability. This isn't how medicine should be practiced. And these sorts of pregnancy complications, I don't know if you can call them common, but they certainly aren't uncommon. Families run into this all the time. And if we want to have a state where young families are coming to start their careers and raise their families, we have to fix this. My understanding, though, is the majority party is not interested in fixing it this year. They want to see how the court cases play out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Manwaring.
Yeah, there's been a lot of effort on this issue to see if we can move the ball forward. And I think the last year in particular, that the excuse, as Senator Ruckty just mentioned, is we've been waiting for some of the litigation to play out, has been the excuse. We know that with the U.S. Supreme Court case that got kicked back to the Ninth Circuit, and I think there's been a hesitancy with this legislature on making any changes pending with that litigation pending. I'm in support of trying to fix the law. I would like to make sure that we have exceptions, particularly in those situations where there's the ectopic pregnancies, or where we know that there's a fetus that is non-viable or can't be carried to full term, and those are decisions between a doctor and their patient that should be made, and that's a step too far for me. So I know and I believe we need to make some changes in our abortion statute and fix that and get that right. I don't want to criminalize physicians in the state. So we have some obligation here to make sure that we're providing some clarifying language for our doctors. As the law currently sits today, EMTALA, or the Emergency Medical Treatment Act, applies. And so doctors are able to rely on that today because of the stay order in the case to treat patients. But the life of the mother has not worked, and the criminalization of the doctors has not worked. And so we have our work cut out for us. And I don't think we're going to get it all done this session, but I would like to see a bill that at least attempts to make that fix. And then we need the doctors to make sure that they're working with us, and they are, and to continue to work with us to make sure that that language is right going forward.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
Thank you. For the last couple of years, from the State Affairs chair the committee that I chair, I've tried to promote a more reasonable posture on this issue. And I had some optimism this year until I heard that from the governor's office that basically, I think his message is to stand down this year as these court cases play out. But, I'm to the point on these court cases, I almost view it as an excuse to not do anything. I think that we need to be a little bit more proactive. The Idaho Medical Association, they have language now that I think goes a long ways to mitigating the problem parts of the current policy, but they're tentative about bringing something forward until there's some kind of support or consensus among the legislators to offer at least a little bit of a path forward. So, but I've encouraged them, to maybe be bold, and now's not the time to tuck and run. So we'll have to maybe take a chance this year. I don't know what'll happen. I will say that if we don't do anything, I think it fuels the opportunity, if you want to call it that, or the likelihood that a ballot initiative is going to come forward. And what I've tried to tell some of my colleagues, and I'm pro-life too, but if we sit on this deal and don't provide some reasonable relief on the victims' moms and docs, then we may end up getting a ballot initiative that takes this issue farther towards the pro-choice end of the spectrum than maybe some of the conservatives are comfortable with. So I don't know. I was hopeful that we would see something, but I'm getting less and less that feeling after we talked to some of my colleagues. And when you look at, especially the minors, some of the issues with the minors, it's just tragic that with your rape and incest victims and the pain that they have to go through, and the lack of a support system or an opportunity to do something that, gives them some closure and recognizes that they're a victim. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Gardner.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said here on this issue. I'm pro-life, and I strongly believe that abortion shouldn't be used as a form of birth control, but this bill needs to be amended. I wish I could do it myself, but unfortunately it takes a majority in the House and the Senate. And but I would, if I had my way, I'd like to see them look at, they need to spell out and clarify for the doctors so that there's some protection for the doctors there, because as it is, they are scared to even do anything, and that's why they're being flown out of state. And the health of the mother, we need to add in there and clarify what the health of the mother means, because a lot of the physicians that I've talked to, or the CEOs of the hospital, are saying that they really do feel like the mother has to be on death's door before they can do anything. Unviable pregnancies, that needs to be addressed in it. And I wish that we could work together and get it done, because I agree with Senator Guthrie that I'm afraid it's going to come on an initiative and kind of takes the air out of the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Our fifth question is about climate change. Currently, a variety of state of Idaho departments, counties, municipalities, and other institutions have specific goals to reduce climate pollution. In 2021, Idaho received $21 million from the bipartisan infrastructure law to create a network of EV charging stations across the state. To this end, many Idaho departments are working to make this happen. Additionally, the state of Idaho was awarded $56 million through the Solar for All program to make solar power accessible to low income, focused on workforce development and job creation. All these actions and federal funding are creating opportunities, but have no guidance or goals from our legislature. The state of Idaho does not have a climate plan or climate goals. How will you encourage our legislative leadership to address this urgent issue? And we'll start with Representative Manwaring.
Well, thank you. And that was kind of a long build-up to the question, but I think what we're ultimately getting to is making sure we have goals setting at the legislature and some leadership on these issues. And some of these are driven by national policy, and a lot of it is federal dollars that also comes into the state and is put out for these programs. I think we do have more direction than maybe is being publicly understood. With the EV charging stations, our ITD, Idaho Transportation Department, has been involved. It was mentioned the Office of Energy and Mineral Resources is involved. We have the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. All these state agencies are involved with these issues. And I just also, want to address that these are important issues. I don't think they always get the front page of the paper, or potentially, in the conservative state that we live in and the Idaho legislature that we have, they're not always the issues that are the issue or topic of the day, because things like abortion and those that we were just talking about take up a lot of the time and energy. But they're very important issues. And, we have the Idaho National Lab in East Idaho that's supporting the development of nuclear energy and clean energy in Idaho. And I've been a strong advocate for making sure that we do all we can to support all forms of alternative and renewable energies. I think we're going to need those to support our energy and infrastructure and our population growth, not just in Idaho, but all over in the United States. We're going to need all forms of new energy production and clean energy as we continue to have more population increase and use, of business and needs and strains on our resources, including our water. And so I think we'll talk more about that. But one other thing we can do to support, a clean environment and making sure that we're meeting whatever goals we come up with is supporting healthy forests in Idaho. We have a lot of forest land in Idaho, and making sure that those are healthy is going to go a long ways to our clean air in particular. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
Yeah, thank you. And, I could just say ditto to a lot of what Representative Manwaring said. I agree with he made a lot of good points there. I think when you look at diversifying energy portfolios, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think we have to always be looking for new ways and creative ways and clean energy ways. But as far as creating some kind of plan at the state level, I would be interested in even looking at something like that. If we can have an honest discussion about where the electrons come from for the EV charging stations. I think there's this mentality that, I've got an electric car, so I'm not contributing to the carbon footprint or to pollution. And that's simply not the case. Those electrons are either coming at the expense of salmon being killed, or fracking, or oil, or coal, or some kind of energy source that's creating those electrons to feed those batteries. And then when you look at the other part of that, the mining that it takes for the raw goods for batteries and those kind of things, the disposal at your landfills when those battery life have died and stuff. And so your windmill blades, for example, your solar panels, that's all has raw goods that have to be mined at the expense of huge diesel motors powering equipment that take care of that mining and those kind of needs. Now, the other thing we've got to keep in mind is we need those raw materials. We need those goods to sustain our life. And so the balance has got to be achieved somehow. But I think we have to have those honest discussions about what exactly is the environmental impact of what we are calling clean energy, because it's not zero. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Representative Garner.
Thank you. The clean energy is a big issue. I think I'm in favor of it, except for there's a few things that has to happen. As Senator Guthrie said, it has to be economical. we shouldn't be subsidizing these things if there's something out there that's better, because it isn't a zero carbon footprint. As he mentioned, the batteries have to go somewhere, and the mining for the nickel and cadmium in the batteries uses fossil fuels to mine them out. The other big thing that I feel like needs to be remembered is we want the public to want them. We've got the Lava Ridge project up there in Twin Falls, and the public has almost unanimously said they don't want it, and yet it's being forced upon the state of Idaho by the feds. That isn't right. The population that lives with it needs to want it. I would support education to the counties and cities to not put an outright ban on solar or windmills. We need to be able to try new things and see what works and what doesn't. They could change their zoning so that it's in certain areas or something, but an outright ban I am not in favor of. We need to keep experimenting with it and make sure that we can find a way that works best, where it's economical and it provides the energy that we need.
Thank you. Senator Ruffey.
Yeah, I agree. We with a lot of things have been said. I mean, for example, we don't have an integrated plan, but we are accomplishing some things. Our utility companies have clean energy goals. We have the Leadership in Nuclear Energy Organization, which kind of works to educate policymakers about the benefits of the nuclear industry in Idaho, the things that it's doing. The legislature has a caucus that's dedicated to energy and technology. I'm the co-chair of that. I'm on the line commission. So we have those things going on, but I agree. We need to have a clean energy plan. I mean, we all need to be on the same page and know where we're heading. We're gonna continue to deal with the consequences of climate change, and I'm a little worried that the legislature's approach to it is to kind of just say, don't say the words climate change, and let's just keep moving on. But we're experiencing it. Our summers are hotter, the fires are more intense. We see what's going on in Los Angeles right now. We have utility companies that are concerned about liability they're going to face if there's a fire that's started that they have something to do with. They don't want to be on the hook for having to pay for the rangeland, the farms, the vacation homes that burn down as a result. You got insurance companies that are reluctant to insure those sorts of operations and vacation homes. So we are dealing with all those issues, but we're not dealing with them comprehensively, and I think we're missing out as a result.
Thank you. Our last question probably that we'll be able to have tonight is about the criminal justice and death penalty. The cost to maintain Idaho's execution capabilities for prisoners sentenced to death has grown to $1.3 million. This includes upgrades to the area planned for a firing squad and changes to the lethal injection process. What is your opinion about the financial costs as well as ethical implications of retaining Idaho's death penalty? And let's start with Senator Guthrie.
Thank you, and I'll be probably pretty brief on this one and maybe allow some latitude for some of the other opinions. When you look at the death penalty and you look at as opposed to life sentence, and you say, why did that occur that way? And it was because a jury or a judge or a combination or whatever come to the conclusion that the crime was so heinous and violated victims' rights to the extent that it deserved something beyond life in prison, which, by the way, as far as when you look at the cost, there's a lot of costs associated with keeping somebody in prison for life, which allows them a lot of opportunities for appeals and accessing the court system and plugging up the process that others could potentially use. So when I look at this issue, when it's warranted, and I think you have to be very careful that we don't execute someone that is innocent, just like we shouldn't keep someone in prison for life that's innocent. And unfortunately, that does happen. But when it's when and where it's warranted, I come down on the side of the victims, and I support the death penalty here in Idaho. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm realizing we are short of time. So what I'd like to do is give the last respondents just 1 minute. Susan, if you could do that for us. Let's have Representative Garner.
Yes, I think Senator Guthrie covered that quite well. It's sad, but the reason we reinstated the firing squad is because we couldn't get the lethal injection drugs, and we're having a hard time building the firing squad facility because we're having a hard time getting contractors to be willing to come in and work on it because they're afraid that they'll get sued. I support the death penalty in those heinous situations. I think it's unethical when we can't for both parties, the victim and the person that committed the crime, when we can't fulfill, like in the lethal injection case that just happened. It prolongs everyone's suffering. And I hope that we can come to a viable solution where we can just do better somehow. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Senator Ruffey.
Thank you. I have a complicated relationship with the death penalty. I actually am supportive of the death penalty where it's warranted, and I think there are situations that it's warranted. And yet, saying I support it is also difficult for me because you're using the power of government to take somebody's life. That's irrevocable. It's not like putting somebody in prison where maybe they can get out someday and they can at least live some quality of life in prison. You're taking somebody's life. And so when we start to modify that, for example, the firing squad issue, I voted against that because I wasn't comfortable that was something we should do. And then there was a bill last year to use the death penalty for crimes other than murder. And I wasn't comfortable with that, even though it would have been, crimes against children that were heinous. But we're now changing where we use the death penalty. And I really get concerned, and I hate using slippery slope arguments, but I get concerned that once you remove it from that realm of eye for an eye retribution, because that kind of is what it is, and you start to expand it past murder crimes, that you can go other places with it as well. And it really isn't, once you...
Thank you.
I think the reason it makes sense to many people is because it is somewhat of an eye for an eye, and that's a principle that we're comfortable with.
Representative Manwaring.
Thank you. I think this has been designed, this death penalty has been in existence in the United States for a long time, and it's designed to address the most heinous crimes and acts that can happen. And there's nothing about our correctional system and someone that's been sentenced to death that's inexpensive. It's expensive through the court case process. It's expensive to incarcerate, and it's expensive to do this right. The number that was cited to 1.3 million, I also think, looking at that number, taking a closer look at that, I also think that with respect to the ethical implications here, it includes some revisions into the execution protocols in Idaho. I think they've made some changes to make sure that they can use central venous catheters. So they can enable access to some larger veins in those individuals. They've also done some remodeling of the execution chamber. Some of this sounds fairly, it can be difficult to talk about, but in reality, when we're talking about the ethical implications, this money is going to make that more ethical and the process work better. I do support the death penalty in cases where the jury's found that to be the right the right punishment. And in Idaho, we need to do that and do it in an ethical manner. And I think even though we had this Thomas Creech case, I think we're going to learn a lot of lessons, and we're going to do it better going forward. So thank you.
Thank you. So that's all the time we have for this evening. The recording for this forum will be available for viewing on YouTube and on the KISU website. To contact the League, go to lwvid.org. And we just wanted to remind you that democracy is not a spectator sport. To that end, the League would like to remind our listeners that your voice matters. And we encourage you to contact your legislators with your comments and questions about issues of importance to you. And you can find their contact information at legislature.idaho.gov. So a sincere thank you to our legislators for their time, participation, and responses this evening. We also appreciate KISU for airing this event live. Have a great evening.